And at the time, he said, well, maybe I could figure out how to use that as a way. So it turns out when you get many gold particles and they cluster together, you can observe that has happened by looking at their optical spectrum.
Hello everyone, you are here with another episode of the series of interviewing an eminent scientist conducted by the Department of Chemistry, University of Colombo. We are fourth year undergraduates of the Department of Chemistry, and I am Shameera Udesh. Chathumini and Wathsala also join as interviewers. Without further delay, let me introduce today's interviewee. Is none other than Professor George C. Schatz from the Department of Chemistry, Northwestern University. Professor George earned his bachelor's degree in chemistry from the Clarkson University in 1971. He completed his doctoral degree in chemistry from Caltech in 1976. And he also served as a postdoctoral research fellow at MIT. Eventually, he joined Northwestern University in 1976. He is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the International Academy of Quantum Molecular Sciences, and was the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Physical Chemistry from 2005 to 2019. He has published over 1,000 papers in scientific publications, and he has also published 3 books.
Professor George has won many achievements in his journey for his remarkable research works. Among those, I would like to mention 3. He received the Fresenius Award for Phi Lambda Epsilon in 1983, Max Planck Research Award in 1993, Berg Medal of the Faraday Division of the Royal Society of Chemistry in 2007, Feynman Prize of the Forsyth Institute in 2008, the 2014 Hirschfelder Award of the University of Wisconsin, the 2014 Mulliken Medal of the University of Chicago, and the 2019 Ahmed Sevel Prize. Welcome, Professor. It's such an honor to have you in this interview. And thank you very much for giving us time from your busy schedule to have a chat with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So now let's start the question. Before all this, we'd like to hear about your childhood memories, educational background, and whether you had a family background related to science.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Thanks. Okay. So it turns out I grew up in a rural part of the state of New York, and I was on a farm when I was a young kid. Okay, we had dairy cows, and so there was no science in the family. Okay, except that in some respects, farmers are really scientists of a sort. Okay, because they have to handle all sorts of issues related to growing crops and tending to animals, things like that. And so that was basically my childhood. Okay, was dealing with those sort of things. And the other thing is that there were chemicals on the farm. Okay, the fertilizers and pesticides and various other things that one needs to be able to have a farm. So that was something which I was familiar with. I didn't really think of it as being something that was necessarily being a scientist. Then I in high school I took courses, and one of them was a chemistry course, and that seemed like an interesting course. It didn't make a big impression on me, to be honest with you. But then, sometimes these things happen. My brother was older, and he went to college, and he took chemistry, and he did terribly at it. Okay, and then when he was finished with the course, he brought home the textbook that he had used for his freshman chemistry course. And so I started reading it, and I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was fantastic to all the stuff that was in his freshman chemistry. I was still in high school. And so in the end, it was like when I applied to college, I decided, well, let's apply to college and see what it's like to major in chemistry. And so I applied to Clarkson University, which was a nearby university. So I wasn't thinking hard about becoming an academic scientist or anything like that. It was mostly just, here's a place I can go to school, I can learn about chemistry and see what it is that chemists end up doing. Okay, so I went to Clarkson, and turns out that that was really just an eye-opening experience for me to take the courses and more importantly to learn to meet the faculty and find out what they did, what was really chemistry about in the larger sense of research that was done, and also industrial chemistry. So it turns out that that's really the first time I ever met anybody who was a chemist of some sort or another, is when I went to college, and so that was, again, I liked that a lot, and put a lot of time and effort into it, and ultimately decided, hey, this is actually a pretty interesting career. Let me let's really pursue it. Okay, let's go to graduate school and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't something that I was really thinking about, like in high school or anything like that. My parents, my mother was a teacher. Okay, so in the end, that was something that I thought of as being an interesting profession, something that was good to do. So that was perhaps why it was that as I gradually learned how to become a chemist when I was in college, I decided, let me go into, the idea of teaching chemistry became attractive to me. And so that was the only sort of academic background that I had, and so forth before finishing college and going to graduate school.
Seems like you had an awesome childhood and a family background related to science. This is my next question for you, Professor. You are best known for your work on the theory of chemical reaction rates, as well as computational modeling of the optical properties of nanoparticles. Was there any inspiration to choose particularly these two fields?
Right. So, yes, I was, as I told you, I went to graduate school, okay, at Caltech. And it turns out, actually, before I went there, I spent a summer at Princeton University doing some research in the area of chemical kinetics. So back then, there was a lot of interest in studying reactions involving gases, reactions of gases with each other. And so I spent a summer in a laboratory studying reactions of things like fluorine atoms with small molecules. And so that got me interested in the idea that, that an important topic in chemistry is understanding the rates of chemical reactions. And so when I went to graduate school, I became aware of the fact that there was this great interest in understanding, not only these gas phase reaction rates and using theory and computational methods to be able to calculate the rates of chemical reactions. Okay, so that was something I was familiar from undergraduate school about, trying to do something like transition state theory, but this was going beyond that level of theory. This was calculating accurately the electronic potential surface and the rate constants that one can get from that. And so that was, after thinking about it for a while, I decided, let me do that. Okay, even though the work at Princeton had been experimental work, I decided to switch over and start doing computational work when I was in graduate school. And it turned out that I was extremely fortunate. Okay, that while I was a graduate student, the ability of computers to describe even the simplest of chemical reactions had finally gotten to the point where you could actually do it. Okay, you could calculate rates of chemical reactions from first principles, and so that made it. I was lucky such that that's what happened while I was at graduate school. That we wrote computer programs that figured out how to calculate the rates of chemical reactions from first principles. So that was a very inspirational project for a PhD. And so then after that, I eventually got a job at Northwestern University, and I decided, that's something that I want to continue trying to do as at least part of my research. Okay, and I did do that for quite a while, and so that led to a lot of different projects that relate to the theory of chemical reactions. But it turns out that when I arrived at Northwestern, there was also some interest in nanoparticles, okay, that had suddenly appeared just about the time that I arrived at Northwestern. So when I arrived there, I talked to the other faculty, and in particular, one of the faculty members, a guy named Richard Van Dyne, had just discovered an effect that is called surface enhanced Raman spectroscopy, okay, which has to do with using silver and gold particles to enhance the intensities of Raman scattering from molecules that are adsorbed onto the particles. And so that had just happened when I showed up. And so it occurred to me that would be an interesting topic as well to do research in. And so that is what I then also did basically from the beginning of my time at Northwestern University. And so that's why it is that all these years later, okay, if you look at my record, actually I did work in the gas phase kinetics for a very long time, but around 20 years ago, I decided it was time to put all my time and effort into nanoparticles. And so I did. And so as a result, the biggest activity I've had for the last 20 years or so has been related to the nanoparticle type properties, right? Optical properties.
Great, Professor. As you mentioned, you have done a lot of work on nanoclusters of noble metals. Can you explain to us what are the major differences that you observed between nanoclusters and nanoparticles?
Right. So that was a topic that evolved quite a bit from my beginning at Northwestern University. All the original experiments had to do with what we call nanoparticles. And these are particles of like silver and gold that typically are on the order of a few nanometers or larger. Okay, in fact, a lot of interesting experiments are done with particles that are 50 to 100 nanometers in size. All right, so that was fine. But it turns out that if you want to do computational modeling of those, then and you want to do something like involving quantum mechanics, then it turns out that it's just impossible to describe that kind of a problem, too many electrons. And so something that I got interested in early at Northwestern was the idea, well, let me try to describe the properties of small metal clusters instead. Okay, clusters that might only have 10 atoms in them, or maybe 100 perhaps. But this was feasible. I could do a calculation, with particles that had a few up to 100 or so atoms of silver or gold in them. And so that was a topic which I sort of started working on back again, not long after I arrived at Northwestern. And initially it was a topic that we could do calculations on it, but we really didn't understand the relationship between those calculations and experiments that were done on much larger particles. Okay, but then, over the course of the last 40 years or so, the basic tools of nanotechnology have been developed. People now can make particles with much greater precision. They can measure the properties of molecules interacting with these particles, things like that. And so and so now we do understand how this all works, and that we realize that you can do calculations on clusters with 10 or 100 atoms in them, and actually they give properties that are very similar, or at least they're related to what you would get with particles that are more like 20 nanometers or 50 nanometers and so on. So that turned out to be a really fortunate thing, because in the end that means that we can do these quantum mechanical calculations, and we can learn about the properties of like Raman spectroscopy properties that are relevant for much larger particles. The other thing that happened, which is also great, is that experimentalists figured out how to make these clusters Okay, so the clusters that I was talking about with 10 to 100 atoms in them, that became a topic of research, and around 20 years ago, the first experiments were done that made clusters like that. And so, since we had already done theory related to this topic, it was a fantastic opportunity for finally connecting with experiments where the experiments are also done on the clusters. And so there's relationships between these cluster properties and the properties of much larger nanoparticles. But there's so-called quantum size effects. There are effects associated with just the finite size of the particle relative to the wavelength of light that turn out to be important for the larger nanoparticles, but not very important for these clusters. And so in the end, it's really quite a fascinating topic to consider. Just what happens. What's the difference between a cluster that might only be less than a nanometer in size and a nanoparticle that is like 100 nanometers in size?
Yes, great, Professor. So, why do you think that it is important to understand the fundamentals behind nanoclusters? What kind of impact could it have on the world?
Right. So, well, it turns out people have found that you can take these silver and gold clusters and use them for sensing and diagnostics. Okay, so one of the things that's good about these small clusters is that they are sometimes they emit light very efficiently. Okay, and so as a result, you can you use them to study. You can tag them to biomolecules, and you can therefore determine where the biomolecules are by doing, like single particle spectroscopy measurements. So that is so I would say the biggest application. That's why people who make these small clusters got interested in trying to figure out how to make them in large quantities. So now it's possible to make kilograms of certain clusters because of just the synthetic methods have been developed. And then if you want to use them, you can use them for these medical diagnostic type applications. There's a few other things. I mean, we have, there's a variety of, it's really, these small clusters are really molecules, and you know exactly what their structures are like, things like that. And so there's interest in a whole bunch of, electrical properties, magnetic properties, things like that. And so, and even catalytic properties, you can use them for catalyzing reactions. Right.
Professor, in your recent work, you have studied the properties of DNA in the cell nucleus. Can you explain a bit about that?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So another topic that I got interested in at Northwestern was DNA. Okay, and there's many stories actually that relate to that. The one that got us going with interest in DNA is that one of my colleagues, a guy named Chathumini, figured out a way to covalently attach DNA strands to gold particles. Okay, so that was back in the 1990s that he figured out how to do that. And so that then leads to a structure which is like a particle, a gold particle, could be like 20 nanometers in size. And then it's surrounded by a bunch of DNAs that have been chemically tethered to the gold particle. Okay, and so that was something that he figured out back then. And it turns out DNA has some wonderful chemical properties. And among other things, you can get DNA strands to hybridize together. And so quickly after he figured out how to attach the DNA to particles, he also figured out how to therefore get the DNA to link many particles together to one another. Okay, and so that was, again, back in the 1990s, that was just kind of a curiosity. But he, and at the time he said, well, maybe I could figure out how to use that as a way. So it turns out when you get many gold particles and they cluster together, you can observe that has happened by looking at their optical spectrum. Okay, so he had the idea that maybe what you could do then is use this as a way of detecting DNA, because it's only the DNA with the right base composition that will enable the linking of the DNAs between different particles and bring all these particles together. So he had this idea that he was going to use these optical property measurements as a way of detecting, DNA of some organism or something like that. Okay, and that works, it turns out, but there's so many other ways to detect DNA that actually that never became a commercial success. However, it turns out that there's other things that that ultimately Chad Merkin and his collaborators, including me, were able to figure out how to do, and that it having to do with medical diagnostics again, how to detect proteins in particular, that again, the proteins can be bound to particles, and then you can use this DNA binding property as a way of detecting which protein that actually bound. And so in the end, there's been companies that have been spun off that are based on the idea of protein, very sensitive detection of proteins with using this DNA attached to gold particles. And there's other applications that came about as a result of the DNA particle stuff. We got interested in making and doing optical properties of not only just isolated particles, but many particles that are all connected together by DNA. And so it turns out that the colloidal properties of silver and gold get modified if you can link them together in certain ways. And so we've taken advantage of those capabilities. And the other thing that happened, then there was a lot of work that related to just DNA. Not attached to gold particles, but just DNA in its own. But once I understood how, basically how to study DNA, then I got involved in other things. Okay, there was a lot of research back 20 years ago at Northwestern University having to do with understanding DNA and biology. Okay, so we got involved in studies of DNA that it exists inside of cell nuclei. So they're inside the cell nucleus. The DNA is wrapped into these little bundles that are called nucleosomes. Okay, and so I worked with several people that were studying that type of thing, and we did modeling and computational modeling so that we could understand just the rules by which the DNA wraps itself around these protein structures that form nucleosomes. And so anyway, so that's another area that I have worked in over the last 20 years or so.
You were the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Physical Chemistry from 2005 to 2019. How was that experience?
Yeah, so of course, I have published in scientific journals for a very long time. And back in the middle 1990s, I had an opportunity to become an associate editor associated with the Journal of Physical Chemistry, and I enjoyed doing that. And so subsequently, in 2005, I was asked to become the editor-in-chief of that journal, Journal of Physical Chemistry, and so that was it was a very active journal. Okay, it's a journal that publishes on the order of 8,000 papers a year. It's now divided into several different parts: JPhys Chem A, B, C, and then there's JPhys Chem Letters. Okay, but anyways, it's a major activity. But for me, it was like just organizing the process, and then doing the things that I still like to do, which is obviously to learn about science. And so it was always fun for me to be able to see the papers when they were submitted to the journal, because I could see these papers, at the time of the science that was really happening. And so, and also I think the other aspect was that I was able to kind of play some role in people's careers, because it was a matter of me understanding their science and trying to advocate for the fact that they should publish the science, in JPhys Chem and so forth. So it was an opportunity to play a role in the larger scientific enterprise, and so that was something that I enjoyed doing for a very long time. And the journal, is larger now than it was when I took over, and I got to work with a lot of people, not only in the USA, but also around the world. Okay, it's an international journal, and so I have traveled to many different countries. I haven't been to Sri Lanka, but I've been to India a few times as part of the journal activities that I was involved in.
My next question is, the field of research is quite competitive. How do you strike a balance between the competitiveness and quality of the research work and scientific thinking?
Yeah, well, it's always a challenge. Okay, I think that's the first order of questions on that. Because in the end, definitely competitive. So that means that for any given area of science that you pursue, you have to figure out what you can do that is going to, push the envelope forward. Okay, and so that can mean many different things. Okay, one of the things that is good for me is that I can get a hold of very good graduate students and postdocs and things like that. And so it's partly a matter of me training them, but also that means that these graduate students and postdocs can really push the envelope in terms of new types of science that they do. And so as long as I can guide them, by keeping up with what's going on, what's the latest science in different areas, and how can I get involved in scientific projects that are going to ask important questions and answer those questions, then that's that's the deal. That's where I like to keep that's, to me, is very stimulating. Obviously there's a matter of competitiveness and things like that plays a role, and so it is always a matter of trying to that shows up in different ways, and it's a matter of how to provide guidance to students and postdocs, because in the end they have to then go off and have their own careers, and what does that mean? So but that's something I'm used to doing. It's I think it's for the right people, I think it's actually a very stimulating activity.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. So moving on to our next question. According to you, what traits or soft skills are important to be a scientist?
Right. Well, it's I think in the end, it's pursuing science at the level of the research and being the leading edge researcher, it really requires a big commitment in terms of time and also, at least for me, it's a matter of trying to identify people and science that are going to help me to push the envelope. Okay, so yeah, those are skills. Okay, first of all, it's a matter of managing time. Okay, which I do many things I have to do, but ultimately at times I just have to say, okay, I can't do this, I need to do that instead. And so that's part of the deal. And I've been fortunate. I've managed to be able to put a lot of time into doing scientific research for a very long time. So that's been a great opportunity. And then also it's a matter of learning people, meeting people, influencing people. Science is very much of a human enterprise, and so there's a lot of human interaction type stuff that is important to do.
Yeah, that's a good interpretation. While we are doing research, as we all know, things can go wrong or unexpected results may be encountered. How do you deal with these kinds of challenges?
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, sometimes things that are unexpected happen, and that you can actually turn an unexpected result into an exciting result. That sometimes happens. But the other version of it is that the thing you thought was going to work doesn't work. Okay, and so that's always a worry. Okay, and so we kind of go through that process all the time. Okay, where something we thought was going to do something and it didn't, and it's like you have to put more time into it, all that kind of stuff, and or sometimes change direction in terms of how you're trying to pursue a project. So yeah, I had to do that quite a bit. It's again, I've got students and postdocs, and so ultimately we talk all the time about their results. To what extent is this moving along in the right direction, or in a few cases I've had to say, what, this really just isn't working. We're going to have to change directions and go off in some other direction instead with the science. And so that does happen. That's just a part of the scientific process. And it's always a matter of did I choose right on this, and stuff like that. And so so there's examples more or less all the time about, I'd like to think I make reasonable choices. Every once in a while, something happens where it's like, oh, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, so we just did a project that was that had to do with understanding the properties of DNA. It's called A-form DNA. So normal Watson Crick DNA is B-form DNA, but there is another form called A-form DNA. And about 6-7 years ago, we got interested in what happens to A-form DNA when you add ethanol to the DNA. And we got a result, and it was an okay result. It wasn't as close to experiment as we wished, but it was like, okay, that's what happens. Okay. And it was, so we wrote a paper about it, and we just said, well, it must be that, something in the force field isn't quite what it needs to be, and therefore this is the best we can do for now. And we just walked away from the project after that. But somebody else, read our paper and said, oh, wait a second, I'll bet you that the problem is that he was using, that I was using the amber force field, and the right force field to use is the charm force field instead. And so he decided to try that. And guess what? He got a lot of good results. Okay. It was like, darn, okay, I easily could have done that project, but I didn't. Okay, so anyway, so he wrote a pretty interesting paper based on that result. So.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. In your opinion, what are the paramount areas of chemistry that could have a major impact on society in the future?
Yeah, well, there's many directions of that discussion, but something that we've worked on at times has had to do with what we call energy science. Okay, in other words, like for example, solar energy. Okay, the development of photovoltaics. Okay, so devices that absorb sunlight and turn that into electricity. That's really evolved a lot over the years. In some respects, the dominant form of photovoltaic for solar applications is based on silicon. That technology was developed back in about 1950 or so. But it turns out that there's been other forms of solar cells, that are quite exciting nowadays. So there's the perovskite solar cells. Okay, and so I was involved in some research that relates to that topic back when it first got to be discovered back about 2011 or so. And so that was exciting. And then also there's organic photovoltaics. Okay, so that's been a topic which has been evolving also quite in an exciting way. And so if you look through our papers, you'll see examples of work that we did related to organic photovoltaics, where things have improved. And ultimately, I think the organic photovoltaics have a good chance of becoming a practical technology that is going to influence society in some way or another. So that's I would say a fairly active area. We're also interested in environmental science. Okay, so a project I'm involved in right now has to do with the fact that there's very little recycling of a lot of crucial metals that are used in what people think of as being modern technology. So you'd like to, people make windmills, they like to make battery-based devices for powering cars, all that kind of stuff. So they're using all these elements, cobalt, rare earth elements, niobium, tantalum, things like that they're mined out of the ground, turned into the devices, and then when the device gets too old, well, mostly it's thrown away. It's really terrible if this happens. Like the lithium that goes into lithium batteries, only about 5% of that is recycled right now. So I'm involved in a project that has to do with trying to figure out, I mean, the reason it's not recycled is because it's too expensive with current technology. So what you'd like to do is to develop the chemistry so that you can recycle, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, things like that, much more effectively than currently exists. So that's a big challenge in chemistry. That's something that really needs to be done, and we're trying to be at least a little part of it. And of course I could talk about medical science as well, which is another sort of grand challenge area, and so on. And but I think I probably said enough already in that. That's a kind of open-ended question that you just asked.
Yes, sir. You are a person in the academic field, an innovator, and an author. How do you plan your work when you're overwhelmed with work and stay organized?
Yeah, well, yeah, you got to be organized. Okay, that's a big deal as far as because I have a lot of responsibilities. Okay, I'm teaching freshman chemistry right now. I have a research group of roughly about 15 people, and everyone has a project that they are trying to make progress with. And there's other activities that you have to do as an academic, and so you have to kind of count the number of hours of the day and make sure that you're using them carefully, and I think that's the biggest thing. And being organized, that's right. I mean, I'm constantly, I have a calendar, and it's like it gets to be really scribbled up a lot because I have so many things going on, and that's one of the reasons I was late for this event. Because I hadn't written it down carefully enough in my calendar to make sure I understood what time that various things were. So yes, so that does happen, but I try to stay organized in what I'm doing.
That will be surely helpful for us, Professor. Professor, you have been recognized for your work with Feynman Prize, Morrison Prize, and Max Planck Research Award. What do these awards mean to you?
Well, I'm just honored and humbled that I have managed to receive some of these awards. Science is a collective enterprise. It isn't just me. It's at the very least, it's my students and postdocs, but actually it is also all my collaborators. It is the whole enterprise as a whole that ends up leading to advances in science. And of course, what I like to do is kind of be on top of things so that if something comes along where I can make a little bit of a contribution that pushes the field along, then I'm delighted to be able to do that. But yeah, these awards are really just recognizing the work of a lot of people, and so in the end, I have done things like I win an award and I'll bring my students to the award event and have a fancy dinner or something like that. But in the end, it's it isn't just me. It's the contributions of a lot of good people.
So would you like to share with us what other activities you do besides science to relax your mind?
Yeah, sure. Well, okay, again, I have to be very efficient. Okay, so I can't take a lot of time doing things, but I do get involved in a variety of things. I like to do things with my family, that sort of stuff. So it's there's a lot of activities. I do like sports, actually. Going way back to high school and college and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a bunch of things that I like to go running around, just really running around the neighborhood. I do that quite a bit. Biking in this area is really good, except when it gets cold. And so so that's good. But when it gets cold, it turns out something I can do that is also great is cross-country skiing. So one of my sports is that. Okay, I can, I live in a place that's very flat, and so, but it turns out cross-country skiing is where skiing on just flat ground turns out to be really interesting to do. So that's another thing that I do. So I have those. I also love reading scientific biographies and finding about the lives of other people who have been scientists and things like that. So that's good. And then I go to the symphony. We go to plays. I go to sports events once in a while. Things like that.
Nice to hear, Professor. So before we conclude the interview, let me ask you, what would you like to tell a young person considering a career in chemistry?
Yeah, sure. Well, something that I think about sometimes is that chemistry has the advantage that it's a very sort of broad field with a lot of different kinds of careers in it. So when I went to college, of course, I had no idea what I was actually ultimately going to do. But I said, well, I could just become a chemist and work in industry. Okay, I could be doing analysis, or I could make formulations for polymers, or a whole bunch of different things. Okay, and so I never did do those things. Okay, I didn't go into industry, but anyways, it was like, oh, but other people did. So some of the people who were my classmates, they went into industry and they did those kind of things. And then, of course, chemistry is a great research field, and so there's research that's done in industry. There's research that's done in various government labs, research done at universities, and so that's a kind of another facet of what goes on in chemistry. And and then of course there's the stuff that I do, which is more I do research, but also I get involved in chemical education. And so it turns out that chemical education is something that people can get involved with at many different levels, all the way, again, high school. My high school teacher was an important person to me, and and then later on, people who are, that I took courses from in college. So that's the advantage. Chemistry really goes in so many different directions that, it's something which can, people of many different, levels of capability can, become successful chemists in one way or another. So it's really just a matter of that to me was always very attractive, even going back to when I was in high school, and so yeah, that would be my biggest, recommendation is that, just realize that chemistry, it's not the only field that has that sort of capability, but it is a field that works that way, such that people can become chemists and then get employment in many different ways, and so it's an area that I always say it's like you just have to get in there, dive in, learn as much as you can, and after you've been working at it for a while, you start realizing where there are opportunities and what you really like to do, and that was perfect for me, because it was, I certainly didn't think when I first went to college that I was going to end up as a university professor, but ultimately that did happen.
Those words are really motivating us, and thank you for such valuable advice. I think now it's the time to wind up this segment. So to wrap up the things, the interview with you was really a fascinating and amazing one, Professor. So once again, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us, and giving out your valuable time for this program. I wish you best of luck in your future work.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure to interact with all of you, and you asked good questions. This was a meaningful program, and I'm glad that I was able to play a part in the program.
You're most welcome. Hope that this interview will inspire young minds who have enthusiasm in the field of science. Stay tuned with us as we have more interviews with outstanding personalities in science from all over the world. Have a nice day.